Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending our second installment of our author series here at our Corrales Community Library. I'd also like to thank our focal group for sponsoring the Zoom Pro platform that we're using tonight. I'm pleased to have Mary P. Davis with us tonight. She's the author of another book on Corrales in the Images of America series, published in 2010, and she also co-authored the book Shining River, Precious Land. Davis served as the Historic Preservation Planner with the City of Albuquerque for nearly 20 years and has served as the chair of the Corrales Historical Society Archives Committee. So please join me in welcoming Mary Davis as she presents Hometown Corrales, a Family Album.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to just start playing my thing. I think I've got to make sure the music doesn't happen because I hate it.
Uh-oh.
Good, no music. I'm just terrified. Sometimes I turn this on and this awful music comes in. I can't stop it. Anyway, well, there's the book. It is a family album. It's a family album of families that have gotten in touch with, whoops, gotta go back. This thing tends to change fast. Families that have been in touch with Corrales Historical Society and that also came into Corrales before we incorporated in 1971. After 1971, the floodgates opened and so many families came, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, that there was no way I could keep track of them. The book got started, took me about 10 years to write, because it got started when the first book, after the first book came out, which looked like this. This came out in 2010, but I want to go back to this briefly. So a lot of people called, or not a lot of people, but enough people called and said, we're not in the book. And I knew the book wasn't, it obviously wasn't everybody, and it will never be everybody, that's for sure. But writing this and that earlier one and doing this Zoom talk and some others that I did earlier have kind of got me thinking about, well, what's, I know Corrales is special, but maybe something in what I'm doing could help me understand what makes Corrales so special. So during this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And if you guys have ideas about why you think Corrales is special and what particularly in its history might have contributed to that, at the end, I hope you will say something, and I'd love to hear from you about that. So this is one of the things Corrales has in its favor is that we got a number of professional photographers who've settled here after World War II. We'll talk about that later, but this is one of the photographs taken by Dick Kent, who came here in 1950, and this is Corrales in 1959. He also has the picture on the back of the book, and I hope you'll, if you don't already have it, hope you'll go buy it at the Frontier Mart or Casa Brea or Bookworks. This is the earlier picture. I love this one because of that face in the window in the back. This is mysterious, and many of these pictures, you could make up whole stories just about the photographs. It's pretty amazing. They're just, some of them are just so compelling. So here's the table of contents. If you haven't seen it, as you can see, we start with a dedication. This is to all the people that have died since we started this book, and I managed to leave one woman out. The families, the majority, of course, are Hispanic, but there's a number of French and Italians, and there's also a number of Anglo names. It's a real hodgepodge, let's say. And again, this is like, what, 1/10 of 1% of all the people that have come through Corrales over the centuries. So we have all these, they're done alphabetically. So if you're looking for a Montano, you know to look at the M's, and this will tell you where to go. The sidebars, we found that there's a lot of information you couldn't put in the in the family story, so we decided to do some sidebars, and we'll see some which give little bits of information about different historic events and elements of Corrales that I thought were really important to contribute to the history. And also, and I have to admit this, I have information about them. There's probably a ton of stuff out there I don't have information about. Oh well. So we'll go from here. The historic families, when I first started this book, I wanted to do it very chronologically. So I started with the people whose surnames were found on the 1790 census, which is the first official census of Corrales. I don't know how many were related to them. There certainly were Martinez's on that census, and there's many Martinez's here in Corrales. And you'll note here that Ralph Martinez, one of the many Martinez's, we tried to find quotes when we could of how people felt about Corrales, what they thought. And I also want to give a huge shout out to Carolyn O'Mara, who is a Historical Society member. She's a graphic designer. She designed this whole thing. She put together all the stuff I threw at her, and she did a great job. She came up with these little design elements. She found this particular type, for the quotes, which she felt was really important to make them stand out. Every once in a while, there would be photos on the front page. These are both from big square photos, but she managed to fit them in beautifully. And the Gutierrez family, another very early family. Many of you probably know Marcos, who is the veterinarian. We'll see him again too. And this is another Gutierrez page. And this is where some of the problems really started, because nobody on this page has Gutierrez as a last name, but they're all descended from Jesus Maria Gutierrez, who's the man who built Casa San Isidro. And he had 2 marriages, so we have 2 separate sets of children and their descendants. And then one of his daughters, Bruna Gutierrez, who lived in the house just north of the old church. Bruna was the sacristana of the church. Many people remember her. Bruna married twice, and so her first marriage was to a Carrillo, and they had 1 child, Stella, and Stella Mares, and Mares is the only place you're going to find that on this page, designed these costumes. She was really loved designing for the Los Pastores pageant. And interestingly enough, this is the little library that used to stand in front of the elementary school, and it's of course long gone now, but right across from that was Stella Morris's house. Bruna married again to a Sandoval, Secondino Sandoval, and had 2 children, Salomon and Sylvia. Here's Sylvia in her graduation picture. Doesn't she look adult? From an 8th grade in the Sandoval Elementary School. And she married a Montano. So we have Gutierrez, Sandoval, Montano. And this picture, all of them, I think, came from Antoinette, who's a little girl here, Montano Patterson. And I'm sorry it's so complex, but I think you'll notice, I think it's on this page, right, that this Gutierrez married a Tenorio, this Gutierrez woman married a Silva, and so we have put the names of people whose families are profiled elsewhere in bold, so if people want to connect them, they can keep going like that. I have to tell you that I'm not a genealogist, but getting through some of these families was a real challenge. Then the French families, the Allery family, name really well known here, and of course they're still living here too, although his Ernest Allery, who's the name I certainly knew the best, he never had children, but his nephew Gary Parker is the one that runs the farm now. They came in the 1879 and over from France. And the quote was a quote that came from a transcript of one of Ernest's many interviews. He was interviewed constantly. And if any of you live near Dixon Road and the old funny scuzzy drain ditch, presumably that area was where the first church stood and where there were many houses. And certainly Ernest kind of supports that, because he reports that his dad said there used to be many homes down there. So there's the Alleries and the Salseys, one of the Italian families that came about 10 years later. The Salsey family too, and their descendants, many of them still live here in Corrales. Dorothy Curtis Trafton, from which the quote is from, is the daughter of Dulcie Curtis, who was the oldest daughter of Angela Salsey. He also had he had 3 girls and 2 boys. Ida Salsey, who married Marcos Gutierrez, another crossover, and Lena Salsey, who married first Garrett Whiteman and then Candido Apodaca. And one son, Virgilio Salsey, who of course didn't have to marry anybody. He lost his name. He kept his name, and he married, interestingly enough, Vincent Curtis, who he married, get it straight, Kathleen Curtis, who was the sister of Vincent Curtis, who married Dulcie. So the families are just wonderfully intertwined. And just to show you one little instance of that, here's the next one of the pages in the Salsey section. Here's Ida and Marcos. They seem to have been padrinos for any number of marriages throughout the village. Ida again with Marcos later and their adopted son Jimmy, and Ida with her adopted daughter Kathy. Kathy still lives here. Jimmy's son Marcos lives here too, in his offices in their old house. Virgilio unfortunately is gone, but one of his children does still live here, and there are a number of grandchildren. So again, this whole interweaving of families into the texture of Corrales history is fascinating. A little bit about the Anglo families. Dick Kent, who I mentioned earlier, professional photographer. The connections just go on and on. It's just amazing. Ken Marthy, who I got to interview through a fluke, I think, because he was only in Grouse like 3 or 4 years, and I now even can't remember how we got to meet him. But Ken and Dick had both served with George Stevens in the photographic unit that went over to Europe to photograph the liberation of Europe. Marthy ended up in Albuquerque after the war. He needed for his health. Connected up with Harvey Caplin, who also had come here after the war and had already discovered Corrales. And Marthy got Ken to come. So thank God. I mean, the pictures were amazing. You just see a little bit of one of the pictures here. We'll see a little bit more of that later. Dick took some marvelous pictures of Corrales and Corrales people. Here's him and his wife building their adobe home, and I swear almost every Anglo who came here within the 10 years after the end of the war built an adobe house. It was phenomenal. It's really, that's one of the things they had to do. One guy didn't, he didn't want to, but most of them did. And the Baylor family came for ranching. Yes, the Baylor is connected to Baylor University. I think it's an uncle or a grandfather or a great uncle. Susie Baylor and the Baylor family were related to Jasper Coons. That was his cousin. And you can see the Coons highlighted there. were ranchers from Texas, and they needed new land, and so more land for their cattle. So they bought, and this is too complicated to talk about really, but anyway, the ranch is where Rio Rancho is today. And it was lost to the citizens of Corrales when they lost really the western 2/3 of the Alameda Grant, which was basically everything, well, you know where the Thompson fence is, everything beyond that. And Thompsons were the first ranchers that were here in the 1920s, and the Baylor Kuntz families came and bought, not from them, but from a later owner in 1948. Open country, beautiful. Susie loved it here, as you can see. She really, and she's still here, and her family's still here. This is another page from their section. Here's Susie here, over here on the right. And I was very happy to have this picture from her, which is both the Kuntz children, the top three, and these kids who are the Baylor kids, all together at Christmas at one of the other Baylor ranches in Texas. So that's the families. These are some of the sidebars, and Carolyn came up with a whole different way of setting them up, different type, different decorative elements. This is Sandia View Academy. It's been here since 1942. We were lucky to be able to work with Molly V. Hill Evans, who was a student there, and she gave us lots of great photographs and a wonderful history. And that's been, what, a 60, yeah, it's been here for Gnosis, and it's still here. That's the thing I keep coming back to. They don't leave. This is something that Alan Minge provided to the Historical Society. He was very active in its founding, and I wanted to include this because many of the names on this list from a militia that was founded in the 1830s to protect, they were one of many, to protect villages from Indian attack. And you can understand, if you remember that picture, we're right there below that big open country, and it's almost a highway for Navajos and Apaches to come over those hills and come down into the green fields and the cattle of the Hispanic settlers in the Rio Grande Valley. So many of these names, Chavez, Cordova, Garcia, Gonzalez, Diego, Lucero, Sanchez, Montoya, they're all in the book. And I definitely wanted to include that to give some idea of the age of some of these families. Also, I love that picture. Carolyn just found wonderful graphics when I couldn't provide any. The Adobe Theatre, another sidebar. And I really want this to kind of, if you haven't already bought the book, to urge you to go buy it, because there's far more in the book than I can ever talk about here. But the Adobe Theatre was in the old church between 1963 and 1987. What they produced was pretty amazing. I know I went to see some of their plays back in the 70s. There was Shakespeare, there was Mice and Men, Ladies Not for Burning, The Matchmaker. They tried almost everything. It was really exciting. And then, because we still had stuff we wanted to include, we had some recollections, which are mostly quotes, and we just couldn't pass it much up. I also wanted to include this picture. These are the three bull toes, a picture taken by Alan Minge, of the bull toes that were in the old church when it was a church. And the quote is about going to the sandhills to pick flowers to take to the church. Unfortunately, this is the only bull toe we know where it is. It's in the new church. We don't know where these two have gone to. But they also found bones. They also would dig up Chamaha, a name we probably know. And Carolyn found this great picture of a Chamaha plant to add to this one. And then T.C. Perea said they used to go duck hunting. Can you believe that? Up there, there were places where water would collect. So there's a bunch of these through the book, and they're just scattered. You just kind of come upon them as you go. Oh dear, I'm talking so much. Oh dear. This is another wonderful aerial by Dick Kent. Another 1959 aerial. This is the southern part of Corrales. This is probably Cabazon Road. Here is the bridge, which we know now is the one which the horses and the people cross. This is the first bridge down here. This newer bridge had been built in 1957. This bridge had been built in 1912. So it served as the only access across the river from the east side between 1912 and 1957. I'm really showing this partly to talk a little bit about the old history. The Rio Grande was always the eastern boundary, but in 1710, when the grant was given, the river flowed on the east side, kind of where 2nd Street is today. So the east boundary was the river, way over there. The west boundary was the Ceja, or the ridge of the Rio Puerco, way to the west, about 14 miles. And interestingly enough, the southern boundary was a hill, and the northern boundary was an old ruin. So who knows exactly where the boundaries were. But this was given in 1710 to Montes Vigil by de Vargas. He was one of de Vargas's soldiers after de Vargas reconquered New Mexico. And but Vigil couldn't hang on to it, so he sold it in 1712 to Juan Gonzalez Paz, who is considered, well, you have to use the word founder, although there's hardly anything he founded. He just kind of settled in, and he was one of, I mean, it was a large family. Much of it lived in, I mean, when he got the grant, he lived in Alameda, because the river presumably moved not right away in 1712. It presumably didn't move till the 1730s. So Alameda and Corrales were on the same side. But the river did move at some point, and it's kind of roughly, you can't really say it's exactly where it was, because you can see all the MRGCD structures and things which have really contained it. It moved all over the place for decades. So anyway, this is the grant. It was alone. There was nothing else. To the north, there was Bernalillo, another 10, 12, 13 miles north. To the south was, and Santa Ana Pueblo, don't forget. And to the south was Atrisco across from Old Town. So the West Mesa was pretty empty, and this was really the only settlement that was on the West Mesa at that time. And across from it was Sandia Pueblo, which thankfully is still there. So we don't have to look at, most of us don't have, particularly us up on the sandhills, don't have to look at subdivisions. We get to look at open country, much as the people did 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Of course, they didn't get to see the casino. So this is kind of the setting for all these families, all this settlement. Now I want to talk a little bit about families and share some of the photographs I most love. This is a Gonzalez family, because I think families are really, really important. Granted, the Gonzalezes have many descendants. A few of them still live here. Linda Gonzalez lives up near Sagebrush. Her grandmother, anyway, they've lived there since the house was built, probably in the early 20th century, and she is a descendant of another branch of the Gonzalez family that was here in the 1790s. This is the children of Herman Gonzalez, and this is Rafael, Oralia, Lorenzo, and Hector. And Hector, he was just a little baby. I'm just wondering what the photographer said to get them to look up there like that. Hector, the family didn't stay in Corrales all the time. They had an old adobe that's kind of would have been north of just where the the bank is, you know, where that big Gonzales stretch is. They had a big Adobe there, and that's where they lived. And then the family moved them into town so they could go to school, but they would come back every summer and probably in the spring and fall when they could to farm their land. Hector has remained connected throughout his life. He died just a few years ago. He's lent the Corrales Historical Society any number of historic documents about his family, about Corrales history. And he was typical of that family connection where they left, but they really never left. And I know certain mayors said Hector called again. He loved to stay in touch with whoever's in charge. Here's Hector in 2017. He just died a few years ago. And he said that this is truly a beautiful place. Our family will, oops, so you get back there. Our family will always be proud to come from Corrales. This is at the celebration of the liberation of Guam. It's where Hector served in World War II, like all of his brothers who all served in World War II. This is Horacio Martinez as a young man. Again, look at that handsome, honest face. I love this picture too. Horacio's ancestors settled in Corrales sometime in the 1830s. He's at least a third generation, if not fourth. And he grew up here. He served in World War II. He came back. His house is still standing right across from the post office. And he married into another old family, the Tafoya family. And the Tafoya family is another family. They came here in 1847. Mary Lou Tafoya Martinez died also very recently. I mean, I'm just so glad we could get these things. Her grandson, Anthony Sanchez, became kind of the family historian. He's let us copy many photographs of the family, and he was aided and abetted in that by Mary Lou's sister, Frances, who was the Tafoya family historian and collector of photographs and genealogist. And so between them, we have wonderful pictures of both of this Martinez family and of the Tafoya family. And this is one of the Tafoya pictures. This is the triplets. And I always have to look up their names because I'm very bad on it. This is Alfonso, Eugenio, and Agapito. They were the stars of the Sandoval Elementary School basketball team. When they were born in 1941, the Tafoya family, which had already had 17 children, of which 14 survived, their house, which had stood east of the main canal, had been flooded out, and they'd moved into a 2-room adobe on the west side. In fact, that house, although it's been much changed, is still there and obviously enlarged. And when these 3 were born, neighbors and friends came and said, "Can we take one of them? You have so many children." And Margarita, the mom, said, "No, I can take care of them." And she did. This is a picture that Frances gave us from 1983. This is Frances over here on the lower right. In the background are the boys. Well, there's more boys there, but these 3 are the triplets. And they obviously became big, strong men. So no problem. Little Margarita down at the bottom looks a little worn out. But Frances not only gave us a wonderful video interview, also has written stuff for La Herencia. She's so proud of how she grew up and what she knows about the New Mexico and her history of her family there. This is Mary Lou Martinez. And Frances is, again, one of those people who left, but almost never left. I mean, she comes to most of our meetings. She loves Corrales and certainly helped us. This is the Griego family. And again, Neita, Chris, the dad, Miguel, his wife, Cleophas. Cleophas is holding her niece. Cleophas's sister Margarita died young, and Cleophas kind of became a second mother to the two children that Margarita had. This is Guadalupe Gutierrez, who is Margarita's husband. And these two are both Griegos. This is Fidelina, and this is Robert. Neita helped us beautifully with the we did a video of the old church, and she had great memories of that. But again, it's that connection with family, because the other daughter was Vicky Seiss, Vicky Gutierrez Seiss. And here's Vicky right in the middle of a picture of the Griego family. Here's Neita over here. And Vicky essentially considered them her second family. And Vicky, again, doesn't live here, or didn't, she's gone now, but she would come to the Corrales Senior Center constantly. She was a regular, I don't even want to say visitor, she was a regular person there. And also, I want to point out that I love getting pictures of the families older, so you get some sense they aren't just charming little children, they grew up into healthy individuals. And another family is the Corrales, and I want to point this out because this man was in World War I. He learned both French and German. He came home and hobnobbed with people like Clinton Anderson, and was kind of one of the wise men of the village. He married, I love this picture too, Felice Mares from Raton, and they had got a front page, 12 children. And the great thing is that many of those children and their grandchildren, all of the children, many of them stayed here. Only one is still alive. This is Viola, and she lives near where she grew up. Everybody else here are her nieces and nephews, because they are the children of the older children of Juan and Felice. And again, this family, Jackie Barreras, who is related to, she's a niece of Viola and lives almost practically across the street from her. Also, one of those people that collects photographs, collects genealogies. She's really been the family historian. And she and Ruby, her, I guess it's a cousin, gave us a lot of photographs as well. And I had to put this picture in. This is in the earlier book. I tried not to repeat photographs, but I wanted to include this just to give you some, again, the strength of the families in Corrales is unbelievable. And Jackie said, Corrales is changing, but I am gathering as much family history as I can, because she's losing them, unfortunately. Here's Juan and Felice here. And this is Viola, much grown up, of course, and many of the other, her brothers and sisters and their children. So again, a very strong family, and many of them still remain here in Corrales. This family, just quickly, again, it's a picture I love, so I wanted to share it. This is Sarah Lucero and her husband Clemente. And Sarah's ancestors lived here. She grew up in the Rio Puerco area, but she worked for a woman, Beatrice Gonzalez, who grew up in Corrales. And when the business that Beatrice's, how am I going to say this, married Richard Heller, I don't want to get too many names in here, who ran the post office in Cabazon. And Sarah basically took care of her 4 children, and they considered Sarah their mother as much as their mother Beatrice. And when the post office closed and Cabazon closed down, Sarah and her husband Clemente Lucero moved into Corrales and built a home in 1947. It's a home that's still there. It's also near across from the post office. I think it just got a big new barn and some stuff in the back, the Lucero home. But between 1947 and about 10 years ago, the Lucero family lived there. These were given me by Richard Garcia, who is the child of this woman, one of the several children that they had. Here's Sarah Lucero in the middle. And again, I just got I was so impressed by the strength of the families that I got pictures from. And of course, the family we all know, the Wagners, the first came to Corrales in 1850, it seems, at least on the 1850, at least one of them was on the 1850 census. This is a picture taken in the early 30s. And here's little Gus, who just died a few years ago, being held by his sister Mary. And here's Adela, and here's Eva. Gus was the only boy, and he became the farmer. Luckily, when he married Arlene Espinosa, they had several sons, and of course the Wagners were still hard at work being the farming family of Corrales. Little Adela still lives here. She married a Sidabaca, and here's her 90th wedding anniversary, 90th birthday, with all the Sidabacas around her, taken just a year ago by David Sidabaca, who's in red here with the bolo tie. Several of his brothers, Mary Rose Rivera, his cousin, and I believe, I can't say for sure, I'm sure that several of these people also still live, these families still live in Corrales. So those connections are just, they're almost endless. It's pretty amazing. So quickly, it's getting late. This is some of the Italians that came. These are the Targeta kids, Battista, Clementina, and Tony. Clementina married a Trasello, and we're all aware of the Trasello fields up north. Battista married Roberta Allery, who was the Allery's youngest daughter. This is a charmer. They had a lot of families, a lot of kids, and among them were these 2 charming children, and this again is one of my most favorite photographs. This is Celia and Anita. Anita, I think, is the taller one, and no, Celia's the taller one, Anita's the shorter one. And this, not even sure what ditch this is. Could be Clear Ditch. Someone once told me they swam in what we now call the Scuzzy Ditch. So I just can't tell you, but there's this is so serene. 2 other of the children were photographed near their parents' home, which is on that big Trasello land. The Targeta home is right at the very end. This is Rosie and Joe. Rosie was that family's historian, and she collected photographs like mad. And one of the photographs was this one, which is that family later. And I hope, okay, this is Celia. I think she's the tall one. Anita, Joe, Roberta, the mom. Well, come on, Mary, you know these people's names. Mary D. Alfred, Henrietta, and here's Rosie at the end. Again, I want to show the passage of time here when I show the older pictures. Anita, wonderfully, through Rosie, wrote up some recipes that their family had used during the Depression, and that's one of our sidebars. I love the one about the beaver. Tastes a little bit like pork. And since the mother was French and the father was Italian, it must have made for some pretty interesting meals. Another French family, the Lemerceaus, didn't stay. Their family is no longer here, although there is a Lemerceau in Bernalillo. This is Louis and Marie Rose Duper, who came again at the end of the beginning of the 20th century, really. He was a coal miner, and worked first they both worked at the coal mines. She ran a boarding house in Kohler, New Mexico, which is up near Raton. They moved here finally around 1910, 1912, and Marie Rose is holding her great-granddaughter, Audrey, and Audrey grew up here in a house which is now, she shared the house with her great-grandmother, her great-aunt, Phoebe, her husband, Christopher Fitzgerald. And she grew up in the house, which is still there, falling apart, on Coronado, just past the little shopping center. It's a real ruin. But Audrey, although she did not return to Corrales too often, she went off and had a very full life elsewhere. But she wrote a wonderful memoir of what it was like to grow up here. And they include stories about her Uncle Chris, who was so proud he could stand on his head when he was 72 out in the fields. She remembered having many of her tasks. One of them was to clean the outdoor privies, because there was, of course, nothing inside. The marvelous meals that they had: frog's legs, quail, pheasant, wild duck. She remembers whitewashing the walls and the fresh smell that permeated the whole house, and how she hated it when they killed the hogs because they screamed, and she turned on the radio and ran away and closed the, she ran away, closed the door, and turned on the radio. So, and Audrey, we got to interview her too, and she looks kind of like her great-grandmother. She was alive and kicking only a few years ago. I'm so glad we got to talk to her. And here's Marcos. I just wanted to throw in some of these quotes that we got talking about family. And everything I've accomplished in life stems from the roots my family has in Corrales. He so well remembers growing up under his grandmother Ida's care. And Toby Griego, this is his dad, Blas, and his brothers and sisters. Here's Toby over here, not looking very happy. But Toby is still around. He lives up on Calle de Blas, west of La Malarga. He's still an accomplished musician. When we did our great celebration to celebrate the book coming out, Toby came and played and played and played. It was wonderful. And he gave us a long thing about how much he loves Corrales. He remembers growing up here, all the customs that they had, and he's glad he's still here. It just makes me so happy that these people want to be here. So now we're in modern times, kind of. Here's that picture from the cover again. It's fun to look at. This is 1959 Corrales. It doesn't look too different from it probably looked 50, 60 years previous to this. Well, I don't know. The church, the school right here was built in the 1920s. Right next to that is what's now El Portal. It was the Octaviano Lopez store. Across from it, very hard to see, is where Mercado de Maya is today. And this was a grocery store. It was the only one building that was there. And it's now the Bosque Gallery. You can see that it's mostly empty. Rio Rancho hasn't appeared yet. You can see Corrales Road. I'm hoping you can read these. It's hard to know whether you can see my little arrow or not. Here's the ditch. Way out here is probably where Loma Larga is. And this is the far horizon where Rio Rancho will turn up eventually. And again, these aerial photos are so much fun because you see funny little roads wandering off and you wonder, whoa, I wonder what that was about. One of the things Susie Baylor said was the way they got on to the ranch was at Coronado Road, which I find really interesting. But Coronado is an early road, there's no question. So here we are in 1959, and this is probably pretty much what Corrales looked like when some of the so-called newcomers who came in the 1940s and 1950s. This is what some of them had to say. Bev said, I had the best childhood on the planet. Betty Colbert, now gone, remembered that her kids could run, go wherever they wanted. Susie said they could go anywhere on their horses. And other people remembered there were no fences. You could kind of just ride across fields. Abby Caplin, Harvey Caplin's daughter, a magical time and place to grow up. John Green, who was a physics professor, came out to buy a piano from one of the Wagners. And they drove around Corrales. This is 1952. And he drove, I don't quite know how this all got managed, but he ended up kind of on the main canal, a little bit north of Westella. And his wife, Anna, John had died, remembered that John sat on the edge of that ditch and said, this is where I want to be. So they bought 16 acres from the Wagners, who Orly Wagner, one of the Wagner kids, not one of Gus's kids, but a cousin, owned this land. So John bought 16 acres, and some of it is still totally open off Old Church Road. Behind it is between the house and Loma Larga has been farmed. It's beautiful. It's a field. And Jane Green, John's daughter, who is the only one still living here, her sister Mary died not too long ago. God, all this death, yuck. And then Ruth Armstrong, who came in the early 50s, lived in the south end of Corrales, wrote a wonderful book called Cycle of Seasons in Corrales. Definitely worth reading. It's wonderful. And this is from that book. They lived right on the edge of the bosque, at the end of Via Oriata. Her children don't live here now, but they have shared both Ruth and her husband Ellis's photographs with us. So they loved it. And the fascinating thing is Bev is still here, her brother's still here, Betty's children aren't, Susie's still here, Jane's still here, and Abby comes back fairly often. She's not here right now. And this is what they had. They had the Baylor Coons Ranch. This is a photograph by Harvey Caplin of Jasper Coons and Casey Darnell driving cattle up off the ranch. Right now, this is where they could ride. These are the sand dunes. This is a picture by Dick Kent. Those are his 3 sons. This was big. I mean, it might have been close to 20, maybe 25 acres, because they remember, there were people remembered there was a big 10-acre parcel they could ride their horses back and forth and play games. This is roughly at the end of Anya Road. There's a very little bit left still. But it's much reduced. I thought this kind of captured what I saw. Maybe I'm a romantic, I don't know. This is getting off the school bus. This is the Scuzzy ditch right over here on the right, and a dirt road, the dirt road. This is Huff Lane right here, and this is probably Susie Huff, and her family owns this property behind them, they loved trees and they wanted the biggest wooded acreage they could get, which they have. Her mother, Estelle, was very active in helping run and keep going the Corrales Library. In fact, she was the librarian when they brought all the books from that little tiny building near the school over to the present library, which had just been built. But this again, the dogs, the kind of empty openness of it, that's what they had. Or they could ice skate on this pond. This is the Jones Pond. It's where the post office is today. Harvey Jones' house is right back in the behind us. That's taken from probably I don't know, the front porch, but some part of it. And this was also used, ice skating, it was used for their cattle, which they had many, because the Jones family were the people that sold, I don't know how much they actually donated, the land for the rec center right now. And this was also used as the water for the volunteer fire department, of which Harvey was a very strong member. And this is Ron Rutherford at his Ludell, at his parents' drive-in, which used to stand just south of where the Frontier Mart is now. The dad, who was a builder, Lou Rutherford, built this in 1959. The mom, Dal, did a lot of the cooking. She also made empanadas, which is not on this particular menu. And Ron and his brother and his sister Bev and the mom would run the drive-in. It was mostly for people who either rode up or walked up. I kind of wish Corrales had one now. Looks like perfect. Maybe there aren't private drive-ins anymore. I don't know. So anyway, Bev's memories, she and Ron would also share the chore of taking care of the cornfields, and they would sell the corn and in the summer, and they would give all their money to their dad, and their dad would give it back to them at the end of the summer. Interestingly enough, field corn went for more than sweet corn, which really surprised me. And she remembered lying out at night, and when the water hit their toes in the fields, and when the water hit their toes, they knew they had to move the board to move the water along. Well, that kind of independence, boy, and they must have been like 10. It's incredible. So Corrales hasn't changed a lot. It's changed a lot recently, and we'll talk about that briefly. But between 1901 and 1952, this first thing is from a man named Robert Stam, who lived in Albuquerque and had work and to do in the northwest part of the state. Came back through Corrales and on his horse through a very early bridge, which didn't last very long. It got washed away in 1904 and didn't get replaced till 1912. But this is what he wrote. I mounted to walk through Corrales with its orchards, vineyards, green alfalfa fields, and scarlet chili vistas hanging down the adobe walls from the housetops. Apart from the world in quiet contentment lay that country scene. And 50 years later, poet Richard Wilbur, who lived here briefly for a year, said he didn't like Albuquerque, but he said, a 5-minute drive out of town brings one to beautiful country. All the houses are small adobes, dirt yards, great cottonwood trees, fields of alfalfa. At this time of year, all the adobe walls are hung with great looping chains of Easters of chili. So in that time span, Corrales hadn't changed a lot. It had changed, and that's always changing. But it's amazing how it held on to that. And if you look at this, here's Roberta Allery with her cow in 1919. And here's Sherry Jones with her cow in, I don't know if this is 1966. So the agricultural traditions kept going, and they're going strong today, which is really good. Things do change. This is a 1972 photo that was given to us. This is what we, because I got here in 72, we call this the four-way stop. It's now, you know, McDonald's, Wendy's, 2 shopping centers, tons and tons of cars. At that time, if you wanted to shop, do any kind of big grocery shopping, you had to go down to 4th Street. Either there was a Piggly Wiggly for a while at Ranchitos, and there was another grocery store farther south at Griegos. This is Skyview Acres, the little village right over here, and the road to Rio Ranchos there. It's been going for 10 years. This hadn't changed quite yet, but things were changing because Corrales changed. This is about the year Corrales incorporated, and I'm sure the presence of Rio Rancho did it, but also, and I think this is one of the big changes. I hope I've got the right picture here. Yes, I do. This was Corrales' link to the world between 1912 and 1957. It was our only link to the world. If you wanted to go down the west side, there wasn't, you had to open and close a lot of gates. Coors Road didn't get paved until 1966. It was a passable dirt road prior to that, but it was still not what you call a highway. But all the life of this whole area took place mostly on the east side. 4th Street became a big road in 1901, and it ran right through the North Valley. Los Ranchos, which has a history not dissimilar to ours, but it had the both maybe advantage and disadvantage of being close to Albuquerque. So you had the train, you had the highway, you had growing subdivisions in the 1930s. It was a whole different world over there. I think that plus the families and our amazing isolation has kept us as special as we are. Because if you think about it, once you get north of the shopping centers, you hit this different place. You hit trees, you hit a narrower road. You're still isolated. I mean, the incorporation did do that. We've got Rio Rancho looming over us on the north and on the west. We have Albuquerque kind of burgeoning up on the south, all those restaurants and shopping centers. But once you get past Sprouts and that big bunch of apartments, you come to a different place. You come to a narrow road, trees, horses, that ditch that goes right along the road, burrows, an orchard. You'll find vineyards right on the road, and if you drive off the road, you'll find cattle, sheep, goats, and of course, people growing things. So we're still here. And I think that between the descendants of the original and early families, the fact that we're trying to save agricultural land, we have a grower's market, we don't have lots of light, thank God. We're really fortunate here. And I think a lot of that is attributable to the farmers who lived here for generations, the newcomers who loved it as their special place, and who worked with the old timers to preserve it. We grew a lot in the 70s and 80s, there's no question. And I think we can hold on to it and keep this special place that I call Corrales. Okay, I'm done. Woo, just 8 o'clock, perfect. If there's any questions, if anybody wants to say anything or comment, it would be wonderful to hear.
Mary, this is Stacia, and
Hi, Stacia. Yes.
What a beautiful treasure that you've brought to us. Your passion and commitment coming through this book is just beautiful. I especially love how you include the recollections and the little stories and
Yeah.
yes, and it's just beautiful, and just knowing that, you know, my boy is running around swimming in the same ditches and climbing the same trees along the bosque, and
That's great.
so thank you so much for bringing this. One question I had, what do you feel, what was the most surprising thing that you learned or experienced or, you know, just put together during
Well,
the
I don't know. I think I didn't realize just how much connections there were between the families, that their intermarriage went on almost all the time. So the Martinezes would be related to the Montoyas and the Gutierrezes. I mean, I didn't realize, and when I talk about it and I say the village, I should have thought that. I mean, I should have realized that was going to happen. But that surprised me. What else really? I was really just so moved by the enthusiasm and just the care that people had in wanting to talk to us. It was, and how they talked about the village. And I think that kind of surprised me because, you know, I'm an Anglo newcomer. But they were incredibly open, and I really appreciated that from everybody we talked to. It was really great. It was really good. So that's, I guess I can't, there probably were very special surprises, but I can't think of them right now. But maybe I'll think of them later, Deja, who knows?
Well, thank you so much, Mary. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Nothing else? Are we done?
I guess. Well,
Okay.
yeah.
I was just waiting to see if a few more, it looks like,
Mary, I just wanted to thank you for those wonderful photos. I especially loved all the kids.
Oh, aren't they great? Thank you, Marianne.
much
Yeah, I
character.
can see I've changed everything here. Great. I'm glad you liked them. And I have to tell you, the book is full of far more than I could possibly talk about in this talk. And the other interesting thing, which I didn't really point out, we now have close to 1,500 photos on the UNM digital site. And obviously the book may have, what, 500 photos in it, maybe a few more. So there's many more photos about Corrales life that are available to people now. And we're really happy about that. Granted, we got all the best ones in here, for sure. I think, most of them, yes.
it was
Thank you,
wonderful.
Mary.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can't wait to buy the book.
Hey, hooray. Oh, and you can buy it at the Frontier Mart, at Perea Casa, at Bookworks, at the Albuquerque Museum. I think they're open now, the store, and on Amazon.
And there's a link on the announcement that I sent out. If you click on the
great.
book, it takes you right to Amazon. So
Oh,
Okay.
Oh, wow. That's great.
does anyone else have anything they'd like to share or ask Mary?
Just thanks, Mary. That was
hey, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Awesome.
Now you can go and watch the debate. And get all upset. Yes. Okay.
Thank you again. That was such an enjoyable way to spend the evening. And I actually did try your creamed asparagus recipe that you included in there. And
Hey,
it came out very good.
Braver than I am, I'm afraid. Well, I remember when I first came, there was asparagus here. I haven't found much lately. I don't know how much is still growing around here, but hopefully some. Yes. Okay, I'm going to leave and
All right.
stop sharing and all the rest of whatever this is.
Thank you so much, Mary. Have a good evening, and thank you all for joining us. Again, the
Thank
link
you.
will be
Bye.
available with the recording for those that couldn't attend.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.